Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this week's Inspiring Leadership podcast. I am really thrilled to have Lynette Jackson. Lynette is the Chief Communications Officer at Siemens, a world famous company. And she's also a great buddy from early days with Mandy Hickson, who we had, who was a pilot, a tornado pilot. And the pair of them, I imagine, make great fun together when they get chatting to each other. So welcome. Great to have you here, Lynette.
Thank you so much for having me, Jonathan.
Yeah. So firstly, let's get talk about Siemens. I mean, as I say, when I was joking with you, people might be living in a cave if they haven't come across Siemens. But how does Siemens help leaders and teams around the world? Because it's got such diversity. Just in a nutshell.
So the simple description is we talk about that we create technology to transform the everyday for everyone. That's very high level, but we are operating in critical industries such as so factories, mobility, trains, and infrastructure, buildings, and energy systems. And we basically help our customers make things better, either from digital transformation or sustainability transformation.
Sounds fantastic. Well, and you as the Chief Communications Officer, you have about 1,000 people working for you around the world. That's really quite a task. How do you sort of like help with the culture and get to know those people? I mean, it's so difficult. What's the challenge for you?
I mean, the very good news is I've got some amazing leaders within the team. But what I try to do is focus on two things. One is that we do great communications that add value to Siemens. And then the second, which I think is almost as important as the first, is I really aim to create an environment where every single communications person can thrive and fulfill their potential. And there's a whole lot of hard work that goes behind that.
Yeah, and the one thing that Mandy was saying about many complimentary things about you, but just empathetic leadership is one of your themes. And I'm doing 360 feedback for somebody at the moment, and they're a very intelligent person, high IQ, but they're underdeveloped EQ. And it really causes a problem for them in leading their teams because the team don't feel that this person really cares about them. And clearly you do care about your people, and it must count. I mean, you've seen people, you've worked with people, I'm sure, who are of the opposite. But how important do you think empathetic leadership is?
What I love is that it's now okay to talk openly about it. And in years past, I felt that I was the anomaly, and that it was maybe a particular communications trait or a female trait to really care. But then I've found, and we talk about it openly in Siemens, the value. And I believe that if you really consider what's going to motivate each person you're working with, whether they're working for you or you're working with them, and really try and tailor how you work with them accordingly, then you get it back in spades. And so then it's actually it's not the golden rule, it's the platinum rule. The golden rule is treat everyone as you would like to be treated. The platinum rule is treat others as they wish to be treated. And I find that really works. And through the course of my career, I feel that I create this sort of sense of team by really focusing on caring about the people I'm working with.
I do like that one because the platinum rule is what I believe is the only of the two rules. I wouldn't go for the other one
Yes.
because others don't want to be treated as you want to be treated.
Nope.
They are unique and they want to be treated in a way that respects their individuality. And one size doesn't fit all. I know it's sort of the fair way of doing things. So if one person does something wrong, everybody gets punished. But I just think that's just so wrong.
Yeah.
And the I know it's a sort of Christian principle, treat others as you want to be treated, but as a Christian, I find platinum is the way that works, and I do love the fact that you've defined it like that. And of course, in a world, and I've worked with Siemens on and off in different ways, and people who are in similar industries. The biggest challenge is that you often have colleagues, particularly with technical specialists and engineering, who high IQ, low EQ, very transactional, get things done. But if you don't care or know about the people you lead and what's going on in their lives, I think you're missing a whole swathe of leadership. You're just doing management. You're not even
Yes.
doing leadership, don't you think?
I agree. And as you say, my whole career has been in technical companies. So I started in an automotive supply organization, and then I've been in sort of engineering companies, technology companies. So I really do understand that engineers like to make things work. But I've also experienced many highly empathetic great leaders among them. And actually, I would go as far as to say that it tends to be the ones who have that EQ, who can be the ones who succeed. There are exceptions.
Yeah.
But then that's where I think the feedback's a beautiful thing. And I think that making our chief people and sustainability officer was doing a podcast at the World Economic Forum. And then she was saying about a learning in her career where she was ready to quit a job, and then they really didn't want to lose her, and then it started explaining that it's okay to say what you need, what help you need. And so I think if somebody finds them in an environment where they don't feel like they're being listened to, heard, cared for, I think it's okay to say, you know what, I really tick better when you're seeing me as a person and not just a cog in the machine.
That is so true. And is that Judith?
Yes.
Yeah, Judith, you spoke highly of, and we're hopefully going to get her as your guest.
Yes,
I think,
yeah, that would be. I mean, she's a really great leader, and I think by nature of being a human resources people professional, then she's got lots of great wisdom.
yeah. And I would add that my surprise and occasional disappointment is I meet a CPO who's perhaps sometimes very good, and they normally call themselves HR directors. They're normally very good at the processes, they know all the rules, but they actually haven't developed such great interpersonal skills themselves. They're high on rules rather and transaction rather than interpersonal. Generally, that's not the case all round, and luckily they're normally the person in the room who does have the empathetic leadership. Well, to exhibit that, I think it would be wrong of me to step around the fact you've just been recovering from an illness, a particularly serious illness. Do you want to tell us what that's been for those listening?
It's awful thing to say is which one. So I mean, recently, so we
Yeah,
were supposed to
the
talk.
recent one first.
We were supposed to. So I don't see it as serious. So recently we were supposed to talk, and I had to postpone because I developed Bell's palsy. So people haven't necessarily heard of it, but as soon as you come across it, then everyone's mum and dad and neighbour has had it, which is I hadn't heard of it. It's basically a neurological condition where there's something probably underlying. It can be a virus, or it can be a tick bite or something attacks your facial nerve. And I just woke up, and the good thing is I can't remember which side. So this side was completely paralyzed,
Your left side. Your left
so
side.
my left side completely paralyzed. So I mean, you can still see I can't raise my eyebrows completely, and I can't completely smile. But 8 weeks in, I'm so much better. But for the first 4 weeks, I couldn't smile, which was awful,
Yeah.
awful. But I kind of count my blessings because it's temporary, and underneath it all, I can still think and work and run and swim and all that fun stuff. But just not. It's really weird when you can't smile because you come across as really quite miserable.
Well, look, I'm greatly relieved that you're on the mend. But as you were alluding to, you've also had a much more serious medical condition that you've had to deal with, and you still will be keeping an eye on it. Do you want to just tell us what happened there?
Yeah, so August 4 years ago, I found a lump in my breast, and immediately went to get checked. Even though I'm not a worrier, I felt that it was important to go and get checked, and then sort of had the different tests, and it seemed positive, and I even forgotten that I'd had those tests. So I'm in Switzerland, so very good medical care. So I saw a doctor. I found the lump on a Saturday, saw a doctor on a Tuesday, and then by the following Monday, I got the diagnosis over the phone. Completely shocked, and then by that Friday, I had a lumpectomy, and then started my chemo. The great thing was it was caught early. It was a pea-sized lump. So I always say that I had cancer treatment. I only had the cancer knowingly for a week. And then I had cancer treatment because it was an aggressive form of breast cancer, triple negative breast cancer. But caught super early, but I did have to go through chemo, did lose my hair, went through all of the side effects that are famous for chemo. But then 4 years on, I've had my scans. I'm clear. And I really talk about it openly because I think it's incredibly important that people realise that the best thing to do is have the checks, because early diagnosis is the best thing you can hope for. The treatment is better and better. Yeah. So I talk about my cancer-y detour.
Well, what a huge thing to go through, and I'm so relieved for you. But I think this is a breast awareness period of time we're going through right now. So what is having been through all this, what's your big lesson, your sort of tip to people out there who firstly may be worried about breast cancer, but second, just cancer in general, because I think it affects 1 in 2 of us?
Yes. I mean, I think that what's really important is to not get behind on any checks. And so that's why, and I haven't done it yet. So is the reminder I must this week. I'll post on LinkedIn, because what I find is when I post a personal story, then people tell me they have got checked. And in a number of cases, actually, people have got checked and then discovered they also have it, but hopefully they've got caught earlier. So number 1, get checked. Number 2, if you do find you've got cancer, it's not the end. As you say, 1 in 2 of us will go through it. And the treatment is better and better and better. And so it can just be a little detour like mine. And I always say that I'm here to talk to anyone who's going through it, because, and I think, again, a bit like sort of what does it take to be a leader? I think we've got to accept that everyone's going to face their journey differently, and there's no right or wrong. I chose to carry on working because I couldn't imagine just sitting and being off sick thinking, so how do I feel? How ill do I feel? How ill will I feel in my next round? I really wanted to stay busy. And this is where my team lifted me up. So while I was going through chemo, there were times when I was worse than useless, and I would ask to do a piece of work for distraction, but it wasn't really helping. I was only helping myself. But my great team kind of stood around and did that. So I think it's really important that if you're going through it yourself or somebody you know, we're all individuals, and so there's not a right or wrong. And then I'd say, if you know somebody who's going through it, don't stay away. If you're close, then, I mean, Mandy was one of my super supporters, because it was during COVID, so I couldn't see people in person. So I had all these amazing people in my life cheering me along the way.
That's so important. And I think your point about have the medical checks, at exactly the same time as you had that, my brother David eventually found out that he'd had metastatic cancer for about 18 months, and it had gone everywhere. And they were taking action all over the place, removing vertebrae and putting pins in his leg and radiating parts of his brain. It was just all too late. And within 10 weeks, he was dead. And David hadn't had the full medical checks. And even when he'd been complaining to the doctor about it, they said, oh, it's just a pro-reaction to the COVID jab. Don't worry about it. Just take paracetamol. Yeah. And of course, they were inundated, understandably, with people who were dying or had COVID. So they were just thinking that he was just, complaining a small bit. But actually, it was terminal for him. So it really brought the lesson home to me. Get the checks done. Do your annual medical checks.
I'm so sorry, Jonathan, because that's something else that I would say. I mean, I'm aware that my sort of little detour was minor, and I've got a great prognosis. So it wasn't nothing, because actually losing your hair and having to tell your mum and your children that you've got cancer is no little thing. But I think having it once and dealing with it is nothing. I always just think, gosh, people who get a recurrence or I've got a great friend who's actually just about to go on a Copperfield trek. She's got metastatic breast cancer. So shout out Vicky Connerty, amazing woman. She was the person I reached out to when I first found my lump, because I could ask her how it was, and then she recovered, and then it's come back. And so she's a hero. And so these people who deal with it, unbelievable.
Yeah, it does bring out all sorts of the best of people's character as well as their fears. But I do remember having a conversation with David, who'd just been through having the vertebrae removed, and his arm was in a sling and various other things. But we were sitting outside his little bungalow in the sun, just final conversation I remember, and just talking about the things that mattered in life. And at the end,
Exactly.
yeah, at the end of the day, it's about relationships, your family, your friends.
And I mean, I think all of us take our health for granted. And then I'm almost embarrassed. We had our leadership meeting last week, and I'd done a video because it's funny that the team in a Teams message said, we won't ask Lynette to do the video to welcome people to the Teams community because half her face isn't working. We'll use the AI assistant. And then, so I made the video joking that I'm not ready to be replaced by AI just yet. But then it meant that I'd been open because I wasn't smiling at that point. And so I thought, if 600 people, and I know maybe 300 of them pretty well, they see me and I'm not smiling. But I honestly, that's the thing. If somebody's got a health situation, realize that it's not fun to have a health situation, because you don't really want to have to talk about it. I always want to pretend that everything's fine, but it's boring to have a recurring health situation.
Well, boring it may be, but it's realistic, and I think we need to face into what people are going through at the time. But look, thank you for I mean, firstly, I'm relieved for you, but thank you for sharing that, because sometimes people don't want to talk about it. But as you say, just like I've had friends from the military and from the police who've talked about their PTSD, I think it's important that people do talk about the experiences they've been through. Otherwise, we think everybody's perfect. And you've had this gilded career with all the different jobs that you've done, but actually you've been through some good times and some tough times. But thinking about back to the sort of the empathetic leadership, some of the really good CEOs and leaders you've worked for, who would you like to call out? I think you were originally talking about John Plant, were you?
Yeah. So, I mean, what's interesting is, I mean, if he's listening, then he would probably say himself, he's not an empathetic leader necessarily, a great person. But what I admired about his leadership was the clarity and the consistency. And I mean, what he did is he created a high performance culture. And so at the time, it didn't feel so soft, but it was effective, and we had a run of years where it was exceptional performance. And so I think that there can be different styles. Clarity, I think, is something brilliant. And I mean, we had our strategic priorities and stuck with them over a matter of a decade. So that consistency and everyone knowing where they stood and creating a performance culture is great. And then he had some good people around him. So, John, you never knew this, but I had a stealth internal communication strategy that I did without really discussing with you, because I knew that was important. And that there was a lot of good, more empathetic leaders around. Now, he might never speak to me again.
But he was one of the leaders that you wanted to call out as an inspiring. Yes. Who else would you like to call out as an inspiring leader, CEO?
Yeah, I mean, I would also actually call out, because we're talking about empathetic leadership, the person who hired me to Siemens. So Cedric Nike is running our largest business now, so Digital Industries. And when he hired me, we were setting up smart infrastructure, and we were going through a lot of change. And he's the person that told me that it's okay to be out as an empathetic leader. And his skill is he quotes that his father taught him that you have 2 ears and 1 mouth. And so that listening is so important. And also he gave me the best piece of feedback that I've ever had, where I interrupted a rather introverted CFO for a second time in a meeting. And the second time, Cedric actually put his arm in front of me, so giving me a look. And then later we were walking through an airport, and I said, I know I can be a horrible interrupter. What should I do? And his feedback was, don't. And I mean, it was so powerful because he didn't give me tips and tricks. He just said don't, and he was so right. And so then I worked out what are my tactics to avoid being a horrible interrupter. Because the reason I used to be, I mean, everyone who works with me, I'm still quite bad, but I really I aim not to. It was that I was worried about losing my train of thought, and so then I would interrupt, so I didn't lose my train of thought, and it's just ugly. And so now what I do is I have a piece of paper and a pen, and while I'm listening, I'll write down a word that will mean I don't lose my train of thought, and I have got much better. So Cedric Niker, empathetic leader and a believer in feedback.
It's very interesting you talk about this point about people interrupting. And I always, because listening, the power of listening is so important. And I think you and I talked before about Nancy Klein, who does some great work in this field, particularly for introverts. And her more recent book called The Promise That Changes Everything. I Won't Interrupt You. So this is one for your reading list. And in it, of course, we're trying to work out why would somebody assault another person's thinking, because that's what it is. You're assaulting their thinking, and that's shocking. I wouldn't assault their thinking. But it's where we get mixed up between intentions and actions. Your intention is to help, to add value, to add to their thoughts, to make sure you don't forget something that might be useful for others. But the actual intention is you assault their thinking, and they lose their train of thought. They get the message that you think you're more important than they are, and that they don't really matter. And as in any of these exercises, if you either ignore someone, so you look the other way and you're looking at your phone and things while they're talking, or you're constantly interrupting them, it really disrupts their thinking pattern. So I think finding out some of the drivers behind our intentions. We judge ourselves by our intentions, and I judge you by your actions and not by your intentions. And if we judged others to find out what their intentions were, that would be very interesting. And then if you have the art of having to summarize what the other person said to their satisfaction, it's very hard to interrupt them.
And I think what's interesting is it's not every meeting is the same, and there's some people where you're sparring constantly, and so you're interrupting each other. Then it's okay. But and actually, I need to. One of the things I do is regularly ask my team for feedback. So if anyone, my team is listening, or actually anyone who knows me, tell me if I have got better at the whole interrupting thing, because I believe I have, but my perception may not be the reality.
Yes, 360 feedback is always the most clear and unadorned feedback when it's unattributable. And I'm just pulling one together for a leader right now, and they wouldn't say this to the leader, but they'll say it to me. And that's very useful. Okay, well, thank you for that one, Lynette. I suppose the next thing is I'm really fascinated by people's origin story. I think, if you really do care about other people and you have that level of curiosity about the platinum rule, you'd want to know what makes them tick and what shapes them to want to be treated the way they want to be treated rather than the way you want to be treated. So share with us, if you would, just in a few minutes, your life story that's made you the successful leader you are today, leading 1,000 people in Siemens as their chief communications officer. How did it all begin?
So I actually thanked my mum just 2 weeks ago, because I was with some other colleagues who had much more complex origin stories than mine. So my father was in the military. So he joined the army at 17, and both my parents from Aberdeen in Scotland. And then they met and fell in love very quickly while my father was working abroad. And then they settled. So I was born when my father was in the army. We settled in Camberley in Surrey. And then I had just a lovely childhood with, so sadly, I lost my father 4 years ago, the same year that I had hip replacement and cancer.
Hip replacement as well?
Yeah, because of another part of my origin. But so 2020 wasn't a great year, but my father was an amazing man. worked for IBM, the most caring father and husband. And I used the description, he gave me enough love for my whole lifetime. So he died way too young at 73. He had Parkinson's. But he just was the most generous man of time and spirit and love. Just a really amazing guy. And then my mum just wanted to be a mum. And so she's also, so my father was fairly driven and a bit of a workaholic. And my mother is just such a people person. And the beautiful thing is when my father died, my mum sort of has stepped in, because I used to talk to my dad about work things and my mum about life. And then when I got this job, one of the things I have to do every year is there's an annual press conference and I have to do an intro in German. My German is horrible. And the first time I was doing it, my mum said, I'll listen to the recording. And then she said she went to bed and she thought, Ralph wouldn't do that. And so she got up to watch, because my mum's not a super, and it was sort of, it was 6:30 her time in the UK. She got up to watch, and then sent me a message that I saw that she'd got up to watch, and she said, I hadn't had a shower and a shave like your father would have done. She was still in her jammies, but so beautiful upbringing with loving parents, and I was a synchronized swimmer. Which is why the hip replacement. So that really formed me as well, because from the age of 9 to 18, I was a synchronized swimmer and swam for Great Britain.
Wow.
And still am in touch with many of my lovely teammates, including my duet partner, who's my best friend. And we still just reminisce about these amazing times as in a team sport, which I think really, so spending that time with discipline of a sport, but also is a very social sport, because you've got a group of 7 other girls in your team, lots and lots and lots of fun. But we also managed to win some medals along the way.
Well, congratulations. Wow, that was a hidden gem that you were a GB synchronized swimmer. And because of all that training that you were doing in the pool, that wore down your hip, was it? And you had to be replaced?
Yeah. So it's so funny. I don't, you probably haven't, I can't believe I'm asking somebody this. There was a documentary about cheerleaders that I only saw bits of it advertised. It's quite recent.
I heard about it.
Yeah. And so there's a thing, I didn't even know it had a name, but the jump splits. So when cheerleaders jump into the splits, and that was my party piece. And I was really proud that I could, on the side of a swimming pool before I got in the water, I could do the jump splits. I could do it to order any time. And even when I got to university, Mandy will recall me doing something similar in Freshers Week. And so actually being super flexible, my hips were misaligned. So 4 years ago, I needed a hip replacement, but it's fine. It's all healed. But
no more jump splits, all right?
Thankfully I can't, and I'm grateful, because my children are super unflexible.
Yeah, not at the Siemens Christmas party, please. Right? Yeah, Precious Week was one thing. Wow, look, I'm so relieved. But let's just briefly touch on Dad and Mum. Yeah. So Dad's 17 from Aberdeen, ended up at Sandhurst, where I was an instructor myself. What was he doing at Sandhurst, and what was his regiment?
Oh no, because he didn't end up at Sandhurst. He was so Camberley, it was just a coincidence that he ended up back in such a military place. So he was in the Gurkhas.
The Gurkhas.
So in Hong Kong, that's where my parents were married, and then he was the Signals, and so ended up. I was born in Germany, ironically, for anyone who hears my Schlechtes Deutsch, my awful German, but they were in northern Germany, along the Kiel Canal when I was born, and then just happened to end up back in that sort of military area, well, coincidentally.
This is very interesting, because I was in the Royal Signals. It's like Dad was in the Royal Signals, and I spent a short attachment to the Queen's Gurkha Signals. But of course, everybody is normally from Nepal. So 1 or 2 who weren't, he must have been something like the quartermaster or something like that. Did he get a special job? What was his job?
Sorry, Daddy, I don't know. I mean, he was. I know that he was at one point an RSM, I think. I don't know. I mean,
Regimental Sergeant Major. Yeah. Okay. Well, Sounds like he had a fascinating career, and as you say, it gives you that work ethic, which can make you a workaholic. You know, you wouldn't have achieved the things your dad did unless he was very driven. You've talked about some pretty dark moments in your life, and don't need to mention any more, but just generally, what have you learned from these tough moments
Yeah.
that will help other people?
No, and I think that I've always been driven by the, as you mentioned, empathetic leadership. So the power of kindness. And a friend of mine gave me a postcard shortly after we left university. Il n'y a rien plus fort que la douceur. There's nothing stronger than softness, and that's something that has driven me. And so I had a work situation that was really horrible. I relocated our family, so 7 years ago, from Switzerland to London for a job, and it just didn't work out at all. Just really didn't work out. Some quite difficult relationships there, and what I learned was I will never ever accept where there's a lack of respect and kindness in the workplace. And I always felt it, but having had a really quite negative experience, I think it made me even stronger as a leader, to make sure, because sometimes things are difficult, sometimes projects are hard, but there's a minimum standard of respect. So I think that kind of helped me. And thinking, I mean, when I was going through this quite difficult time, the HR professional at the time said, well, what's the worst that can happen? And the worst that could happen is I don't find myself without a job and having children in school to pay and all the rest of it. And it did happen. And while I've got a happy ending because very quickly I found Siemens, I would never say that to somebody, because actually it is really, really tough when people find themselves in a situation where they haven't got a job.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I think it's good to go through it, because most people will go through that once in their career.
I think those I've known who've had a gilded career, and they've gone from strength to strength and job to job, and life just fallen into their hands. Often it looks like that, but they've normally had something along the way where they've got a bit of a shock horror. I mean, I had my own moment when I was an instructor at Sandhurst, and I thought this was it. I've arrived. I'm Top Gun. I've been selected as one of these instructors at the world famous elite military academy, and then I got given my first average report, having had a string of outstandings, and I go, what? You mean I'm not God's gift? And of course I was with people who were amazing leaders from their regiments. They were way better than me. And that was my moment where I reached out to find out people who had served with my father, who was killed when I was just 2.5. And he was an inspiring leader and saved the life of a couple of other people. And from the people who'd survived and the stories they told me about my father, that gave me my purpose of interviewing leaders like you and Matt and others, and passing on your experiences and your wisdom to others. So I think from disaster, we can pluck out some really good things, but I wouldn't have wished that on you. But I do think you touch on a very key point, that the lack of respect and kindness, I'd even embrace it into the word dignity. And there's a very good book about dignity by Professor Donna Hicks, Hicks. She was one of my professors when I was at Harvard, on a course at Harvard. And her book on dignity is very good. And indeed, people can listen and Google the 10 components of dignity, the 10 things that is a birthright of everybody to be treated with dignity. Your respect can be earned or lost, but everybody should be treated with dignity. And the 10 destroyers of dignity. And both the 10 foundational principles of what gives another person dignity and the 10 that will remove them are really wake-up calls to us all. And indeed, I'm thinking of a leader I'm trying to help at the moment who is clearly not showing dignity to the way they're treating other people. And as a result, they are very poor at leading. They are misleaders rather than inspiring leaders or expiring leaders, the ones who suck the life out of you. You must have worked for some of those, haven't you?
Maybe one in London, perhaps.
Yes, I got that. So it's very interesting if we come talking about the job you're doing now, this one about global communications. There's so much sort of macroeconomic uncertainty. There's geopolitical volatility going on. We're recording this at a time when a couple of weeks we've got the US election. Trump gets in, then Ukraine's finished, and we've got Israel enmeshed in Hamas and Hezbollah and Iran requiring a rocket response from them, and all sorts of things going on. And then there's you look at Sudan with some of the worst atrocious things happening there. There's all sorts of things going on. And how do you get clear and precise communication in that kind of world when you're dealing with you're global, you're dealing with
So I mean, I sometimes will say that if I knew then what I know now, I wouldn't have been brave enough to take this job, because so if you go back to 2021, when I took this job, we hadn't had the Ukraine war right on the doorstep here in Europe. There hadn't been the supply chain crisis following COVID. There wasn't such tensions between China and the US, and we hadn't had the terror attacks of October the 7th last year. So there's been a lot of very complex situations happen since. And what my lesson is, or lessons, I mean, there's multiple. One clear thing is this notion of lenses, and ensuring that my teams around the world understand that they have a lens and that they should think of the lenses of others. So my amazing communications lead in China understands that if she says a certain thing in China, then it's going to be read in the US, and the US will be read in China. And so having that, and it comes back to respect again, and the eyes open that there is a consequence in a global world. But then sometimes you can't say nothing. So we do have to say something that is relevant to the audiences, but do that with the respect for the others. And then the other really big one that I learned through the communications around the Ukraine war, because imagine, so 7:30 in the morning, I get a call from actually Cedric Nyko, because he was the leader responsible for Russia and Ukraine, asking if we had a comms plan for a war. And interestingly, Germany didn't really see the likelihood of war. They thought that it was just going to be an escalating conflict. So we didn't have a comms plan for a war. And then suddenly we were in a situation, and Siemens had a more than 150-year history and ran the fast change from St. Petersburg to Moscow. So the complexities there were tremendous. And luckily, there were amazing colleagues. So our head of compliance, our head of legal, and other great people were able to navigate that situation. But what I learned there was this notion of least worst. So sometimes your communications isn't going to be good because there's nothing good. But what you have to seek is what's the least worst. And you have to kind of ask colleagues and exchange, but then you've got to sometimes go with your gut in terms of what's the best possible situation given real dilemmas and complexities.
Yes, and it's just like governments supporting dodgy dictators of Libya in the old days when it was Gaddafi there, but then they wanted to get rid of him, and now it's even worse. And getting rid of Saddam Hussein was an autocrat, but what we've got left there is even worse. And then what happens to various countries, like there was Siemens operating the train from St. Petersburg to Moscow. What do you do when there's a war on and everybody else wants to leave? Can you leave? Do you hand it over?
We did leave. And I tell you, I mean, we made, I was really proud of the board at the time, because we made the decision to actually stop all new business in Russia and new business to Russia. All business to Russia stopped, new business stopped. And we did that beyond the sanctions, because we felt that there was sort of a moral obligation as well as all of the sanctions. But then we decided to withdraw, but we couldn't say that we were withdrawing because we had a duty of care to the people working in train depots. And if Siemens announced it was exiting not in a controlled way, then the army could well have gone into one of those depots and threatened our people, and they were our people, even if they're on an opposing side in a war. So it was hugely complex. And so then we had young colleagues and old colleagues say, why aren't we withdrawing? How can we stay in? And we knew that we were going to withdraw, but we weren't ready to say it. So then we had to sort of navigate it was about 4 weeks where the heat was rising to do the right thing, and we knew we were going to do the right thing.
And that's touched on a very interesting point for CEOs and global communications officers like yourself, in that there are times when you will know something, well, a lot of time when you know something, but others don't know it. And you have to sit with that, holding that confidence, but yet not blowing the story, because blowing the story could actually endanger lives.
Yes.
But I do think I'm very pleased that Siemens did that, because I think there are certain companies who've done pretty indefensible decisions they made for commercial reasons, which lack integrity. It might not break the letter of the law, but just you sort of know, and you're brought up with doing the right thing and not just doing things right. And I do think in any key role like yours or the CEO of any organization, you have to look yourself in the mirror and go, am I doing the right thing?
Yes.
And would I, if I had a friend who was in this job, what advice would I give them? Because we're all great at giving advice to our best friend.
Yes.
We can give Mandy some great advice, and she can give you some great advice.
She does often.
We don't often take our own advice. We can give it to others,
Yes.
but that's the exercise that you probably have done, where you write a note as if it's to Mandy and what advice you'd give her if she had the same you had, and then you take it.
Yes, and we've got actually an ethical framework that's been developed in the last few years, because increasingly with this geoeconomic complexity, there are these ethical dilemmas that leaders have to face. So we've now got a decision framework that we train our people on.
Well, then
sometimes it still doesn't work. Sometimes you still have to write that letter to a friend.
You need to chat to my friend Roger Steer, who wrote a great book on ethics and ethicability and measuring it in different companies and how you deal with these dilemmas. He's particularly interested with an aspect that's big for you. You're deeply involved in Siemens in digital transformation. And as I pick up different AI tools like Perplexity and ChatGPT and Otter and Google LM Notebook, they're all great tools to help as I'm writing my next book. It's quite a good way of collating the transcripts of 360 different podcasts and things like that. But you know, AI is 80% great news, 20% quite scary. That the singularity, that moment when AI is more intelligent than us, is at least, if not earlier than 2059. It's probably going to be much quicker than that. Then we are like the 3 dogs who are here in my sitting room compared to me. AI is me, and I'm the dog there with sort of waiting for AI to tell me what's going to happen and whether I'm going to live on. And I think the ethics behind that is really scary, because who's going to write the code for those ethics? And are they the same kind of ethics that you want? They're written by someone who's a Donald Trump supporter and a Republican. Are you happy that their ethics on gun laws are going to be the same as yours? What's the AI going to decide? So I don't know. Have you spent time on that?
Yeah, I mean, so as I mentioned, I was at our leadership meeting and we had 3 speakers. And one was Arthur Mensch, who's the CEO of Mistral, so a younger AI company, but still one of the biggest. Jensen Huang, CEO of NVIDIA, and Bill Gates was in the room with us last week. So we had some interesting discussions around technology and basically, I strongly believe that technology is the most powerful tool of humanity, in brackets, if managed well. And if managed well, I think we're going to rely on some bright minds who really understand, because in order to navigate, you've really got to understand. So we're going to have to rely on the best and the brightest who understand what AI can do, and actually be driven by the same kind of rules we have for technology. So when the internet came, then everyone said, what on earth is this? And interestingly, the one thing where Bill Gates said he doesn't have the answer yet is the whole challenge of social media. So he wasn't concerned, and nor am I really, about the application of AI in industry, because the need to get it right is so high when you're talking about in factory applications of AI or managing energy systems. But where it becomes really messy is misinformation and disinformation, where, I mean, I think we probably need to get some clever people in a room to look at that. Yeah. Because I'm on X still, because it's still a platform that journalists use, but I struggle, I have to say, because
I won't use it.
No, no, and I'm sort of, there were times when I was about to walk away. I think what you can do, you can control who you follow, so you can, you know, I'm following people who are experts on digital transition. I'm not following people who are commenting about King Charles or Meghan Markle. But it's a worry, and I think that's where on all cases we're going to have to get really great minds who understand enough about it not to be dogmatic, because we often have conversations about regulation of AI, and if we over-regulate in Europe, that's not good for competition. But if you don't regulate enough, then we will be the dogs.
Yeah, we definitely will. And no, I think that's a whole conversation in its own. But no, fascinating to think, and pleasing to think that you're looking at that so much. I was thinking about, you know, your job. You're constantly getting dramas. You know, if there is no drama, they don't need you, right? So anybody I know in the communications, in the PR world, and trying to manage people's brand and reputation, there's constantly some drama where someone's done something, said something. And I was wondering, without actually going into the details of it, so you couldn't, it would put you in an awkward position. But just when you've had a non-specific communications crisis at Siemens, what was your approach to it, and how did you solve it? If you just some of the lessons, that, because the big people out there who haven't maybe had a comms problem yet, but boy, they're going to, and when it hits them, it just takes over everything, doesn't it?
So this is for Sven. It's always a Friday afternoon. I mean, that's the thing. These issues never come up at 11 o'clock on a Monday. I mean, it's always public holiday. Something's, you know, somebody's birthday. But in all seriousness, I mean, because we're such a large company and operate in so many different countries, and we have critical infrastructure, so we have faced almost every kind of issue. And there's a difference between an issue and a crisis. So issues come up that you can solve and nobody hears about them, and then there's not so many real crises. But actually, as a large company,
what's your differentiation?
So I mean, a crisis is where it's impacting people's lives. It's really detrimental to the either the reputation, or you're going to lose money from it. An issue is, I mean, an issue would be that you hear that there's a cybersecurity breach in a factory, so you've got to take it seriously, but you might be able to resolve it before anyone will ever know about it. So that's sort of issue. So we've got really detailed processes to follow. However, it all comes down to people, and I mean, whatever the situation, then we'll get a small group of people together to say, is this something that we've dealt with before? And so we can kind of get the playbook. We've got, I mean, we're lucky enough, we've got a security department. So for bigger topics, then our security experts will give us briefings about the reality. But then it comes down to a group of people who have been through a lot, and normally, but then I find it fascinating, because when you come across an issue that could become a crisis that you've never thought about, then it's fascinating to then have to navigate. But I would always say we've got people who've been through a lot, and so we rely on each other. But then if it's one where we've never come across it before, and one came up recently, which was more sort of salacious. It was sort of more about people and behaviour. And there we then went to a different external counsel to ask for advice. And the point is to do lots of good scenario planning. Holding statement is the first thing that we do, is be ready so that when that first call comes, you're not having to scrabble around. So the number of holding statements that I've reviewed in my time is is quite a number. But we've got some good experts and processes. So shout out to the lovely crisis and issues management team, who actually, what we tend to do is we get them to work on other things other than just issues and crises, because it can be a bit draining.
Yeah, no, I can imagine. And there are all sorts of different scenarios. And I think back to my military planning when I was being trained at Staff College. We were being trained all the time for dealing with issues and crises. And I think as Mike Tyson famously said, everybody's got a plan to get punched in the mouth. And I think planning to fail is failing to plan. But Eisenhower famously said that planning is essential, but plans are useless. And you got to constantly iterate and just have a mindset to deal with, okay, what's happened? So what now? I mean, the Navy SEALs say that. So what now? What are we going to do now?
Yeah.
Hey, look, fascinating. And we're coming to the end now. Before we do your 2-minute top tip in a moment, favorite book that you found useful on leadership and, developing empathy?
Yeah. I mean, I am a reader, and I've read a lot, and I also am a cheat reader because I like blink lists, because but I would say the one that sort of touched me was I don't even, sorry, the exact title, but it's Brené's different ones. So there's one in 2012, one in 2018. So really those ones where she's delving into vulnerability.
Yeah.
I've found those really, really valuable. And I mean, it's a bit of a cliche, but as a comms person, Start With Why, Simon Sinek is a good old classic.
Yeah, I was reading his latest one. Well, not his latest one, his other one about Leaders Eat Last.
Yes.
It's good. Yeah, fantastic. Okay, well, look, Lynette, thank you. Would you now introduce who you are, the role you do, and your organization, and then share with us a practical leadership tip that you have found useful that others around the world might find useful too?
Okay, so I'm Lynette Jackson, and I'm currently the Chief Communications Officer of Siemens AG, which means I manage the brand and reputation for a large multinational company. And I would say that the best tip that I would give as a leader is the power of positivity, which is a great thing in general, but even better is assuming positive intent. And I would say that around 97, 98, 99 or higher times, people have a positive intent, but then that means 1 time in 100 they don't. And do you know what? Assuming positive intent in those 1% of cases is even better.
Yeah. Great wisdom. And I do particularly like that. Just like 97% of all the things we worry about never happen. But you got to prepare for some of these eventualities. Do your scenario planning, as you were saying.
Yes.
Lynette Jackson, thank you very much indeed for being on the Inspiring Leadership podcast. It's been a real pleasure, and I know everybody will take a lot from it. So thank you very much indeed.
Thank you so much for having me. Great to talk to you.